Some loathed the new semi-communist government tied to Moscow, but others found reasons to accept it and live with it.
The most important thing for me was for my mother and sister to come from Siberia and for us to begin rebuilding the country. We also needed to secure our borders, which were seriously threatened. Staying in the army gave me that chance.
In Moscow, Poland's new puppet leaders were taken to the opera. The Poles agreed to a close alliance with the Soviet Union. Stalin promised to defend the new Polish frontiers against any German attempt to win back the lost territories. Stalin was at the zenith of his power. His colleagues felt terror in his presence.
Russian diplomats, like all other Russian officials or party members or whatever, lived in terror of the great man, and justifiably so, because if they gave unpopular advice, they might find themselves in a concentration camp or with a bullet in the back of their heads. It wasn't very easy to give good advice to Stalin. It was unpalatable.
Он сидел такой веселый, настроение у него хорошее, рядом сидел с ним.
Stalin was cheerful and in high spirits. At his side were the main guest, the interpreter, and Soviet guests too.
Вроде и гости, и наши, все так. И когда раздавали официанты там какой-то...
The waiters came in with the main course.
То или
I think it was turkey.
То один официант, когда наливал...
One of them, whilst he was pouring the sauce, dropped some red liquid on Stalin's sand-colored jacket.
На этот китель, да? Красный такой... жидкость, эту самую, сок красный, да, и этот он как струйка крови, знаете, так потекла по всему этому красивому, нарядному, торжественному мундиру.
They were in a state of shock about what would happen, because the stains looked like drops of blood.
Замерли в испуге, что будет вообще.
But Stalin didn't react. He continued to talk with his neighbor.
Вот, к нему там подскочил какой-то обслуживающий шеф, там обслуживающий.
Then another waiter came up to him with some water and offered to sponge it out. But Stalin said, no, no, and he was absolutely calm.
Просидел совершенно спокойно. Все, значит, увидели.
People saw that things seemed to be okay. Everyone began eating again, and the routine continued.
Спокойно до конца и просидел.
To mark the Soviet elections, Stalin made a grand appearance. To his exhausted people, he promised no rewards, but only more effort, more 5-year plans for heavy industry. Then, in cloudy words, he warned that capitalism and imperialism made future wars inevitable. Did this mean war between the Soviet Union and the West? Abroad, alarm bells rang.
I read the speech with care and interpreted it as being a delayed declaration of war against the United States. Wasn't any doubt about it if you read the text carefully, what he was talking about.
The
speech was interpreted in the West as no less than a prediction of World War III.
I
don't think this was right, though.
Но я думаю, что это вряд ли правильно. Во всяком случае,
Stalin didn't say anything new or different in that speech.
Сталин не сказал.
He said what he had always believed, that with imperialism and capitalism, war was inevitable.
С империализмом, с капитализмом неизбежно.
What the Russians were thinking in terms of was that, and I think Stalin thought in these terms, was that communism was one day going to rule, be the dominant ideology in the world, and all countries gradually were going to become communist. And in the meantime, you didn't, in Stalin's idea, start dangerous wars which you might lose, but if you had a good chance of pushing the cause along, you always pushed it along.
Stalin had relaxed his dictatorship during the war, but now he was tightening it once more. The Soviet Union's obvious suspicion of the West disturbed Washington. An American diplomat in Moscow, George Kennan, was asked what he thought was going on.
When they finally sent me a telegram expressing their astonishment and concern because the Russians were dragging their feet about joining the International Bank, I thought, well, for goodness sake, I can't answer that in one question. They're going to have to give me space. And I sat down and tried to give a picture of this government as it emerged from the war.
One of the strengths of Kennan was his awareness that the Russia in which we were living, Stalin's Soviet Russia, communism, people called it, actually drew in very many ways upon the Russian past.
I had to go right back to page 1 and to try to tell them things that I felt they'd forgotten during the war. This all hangs together with this whole question that this was the same group of people who had dealt with Hitler, had tried to deal with Hitler at our expense, and never had changed their views about us.
Kennan's Moscow embassy cable became history, an 8,000-word prophecy that the Soviet Union was in the mood to expand across the world and must be contained.
The day that telegram was drafted, I unfortunately or fortunately had the night duty at the code room and was rather perturbed about it because I happened to have a very heavy date that night. There was a dance at one of the other embassies, and I wanted to get out as early as possible. About 6:30 or 7, George comes walking in with this 6-part cable which he wants to send out. And I took a look at it and I said it was nice, but let's not send it out. Let's wait till tomorrow. And I tried to talk him into not sending it. He said, Washington wants it, they're going to get it, and you stay here and do it.
Kennan's telegram alarmed Washington. Days later, its message was reinforced when Churchill arrived in the United States as President Truman's guest.
They began to get to know each other. Mr. Fred, our president, said to Mr. Churchill, "I will be on this trip quite a while, and I would be glad if you would call me Harry." Well, Mr. Churchill said, "I'll be glad to if you will call me Winston." Mr. Truman said, "I don't believe I can do that." He said, "I consider you the first citizen in the world, and I just don't believe I can call you Winston." Winston Churchill said, "If you can't call me Winston, then I can't call you Harry." The president said, "On that basis, we'll do it." So it went Winston and Harry from that time, and they got on very well.
Churchill was due to speak to a college audience at Fulton in Truman's home state. Privately, he showed Truman what he was going to say. The president, not sure that the American public was ready for an attack on its wartime Soviet ally, let Churchill test the water.
Mr. Churchill, he's one of the great men of the age. He's a great Englishman. He's a great Englishman, but he's half American.
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe. except in the British Commonwealth and in the United States, where communism is in its infancy, the Communist parties, or fifth columns, constitute a growing challenge and peril to Christian civilization. Whatever conclusions may be drawn from these facts, and facts they are, this is certainly not the liberated Europe we fought to build up, nor is it one which contains the essentials of permanent peace.
Immediately after that, Stalin came out with answers to a foreign correspondent's questions, in which he compared Churchill to Hitler and decried Churchill's speech as a belligerent call to arms against Soviet Russia.
Since 1945, America had been extending its influence and power all over the world. Stalin grew nervous. He put pressure on Turkey to grant the Soviet Union a military presence in the Dardanelles and the Bosporus. America and Britain feared a threat to the Suez Canal. They were determined to keep Turkey free of Soviet interference. When the Turkish ambassador in Washington died suddenly, Truman used America's biggest battleship, the USS Missouri, to deliver the body to Istanbul.
This was a symbol to Stalin. Don't push us, and don't push Turkey, because if you push Turkey, we'll be there.
Iran, like Turkey, lay on the southern borders of the Soviet Union, and for centuries had been hostile to Russia. During the war, Soviet and British troops had occupied Iran to protect their oil supplies. They even celebrated their partnership there.